colloquium series. There are so many different events that I have to readjust myself. This is reports from the field. The center has a pre-dissertation research award for students who are completing the graduate certificate in Latin American, Caribbean, Latino studies. And these students have, gotten the research award, and then one of their requirements is that afterwards they have to present a report of the work that they did with the pre-dissertation award. So here we have Marta Balaguer, Manuela Borsoni, and Carlos Valderrama. Political science, PIBE, otherwise known as PIBE. From comparative literature, from political science, and from sociology. So we put them together and they give us a report. And the first one is going to be Manuela, because she has a presentation that has lots of images. And we were having some trouble and the images were flickering, and now they're fixed, so let's hope that it stays that way. So her presentation is Traveling Gauchos, the calendar illustrations of Florencio Molina Campos in Argentina and the United States. And then it's going to be Marta Balaguer, who's going to present on intersecting transitions, migration, confinement, and gender at the limits of sovereignty. ¿Cómo se dice esa? Sovereignty. There you go. And then PIBE, Valderrama Renteria, from sociology, imaging black community size and forms of black politics in Colombia of the 1970s. So, here we are.
Okay, so because I know my images sometimes flicker, I also brought some handouts. Now the first one is in color, and then the rest are not, so just thank you.
Eso es para que te quedes tú con el de
Así es. A ella le van a tocar más. She's gonna get them all in color eventually.
So you can share them because it was.
Yeah, they're just maybe you allow me to.
I'm sharing with these guys.
Yeah, they're all gonna be here as well, just so that you have them. In case you can't put them down and feel compelled to watch them over and over again. So, how many of you have ever heard of Florencio Molina Campos? But that I haven't told you. You knew before you met me. Before you met her.
Before I met her, no.
He's really, really well known in Argentina. I asked, I grew up with his images. They were printed in telephone cards. The ones, you remember when you had to use a telephone card to use a public phone? Well, they were reprinted, they were reissued. They were always being reissued, all of these images by Florencio Molina Campos. And part of my interest in this is part of my dissertation is the gauchesca in Argentina and Uruguay. Now, in case you don't know, I'll give you a crash course in gauchesca. It's a popular genre that blossomed especially in the 19th century in Argentina, Uruguay, and southern Brazil. The term usually describes poems, novels, plays, loose leaves, a whole variety of cultural productions and print culture media that deals with gauchos as the center and the voice of whatever it is that they're talking to you about. It's usually a gaucho that's talking about something. Now, gauchesca became very, very important, especially in the first years of the 20th century, after Lugones gives a series of lectures that then are collected as El Payador. And he says that, in order to be Argentinian, you need to learn how to read gauchesca, right? And so he establishes it as a canon, as a canonical genre for Argentina. Now, as I said, the issue is that gauchesca is a popular genre, so there's more than what Lugones initially identified, and this is where the issue periodization comes into play, because for a long time now, throughout the 20th century, different scholars and Argentinian historiography has been dealing with the end of Gauchesca and has been saying, well, it ended in the poetry. When the poetry ends, then Gauchesca ends. And then some others say, no. It ends with the publication in 1926 of a novel, Don Segundo Sombra. And then some others say, no. Borges ends it in the 50s when he writes 2 short stories. One is titled The End and the other one is The South. El Sur and El Fin, right? So there's always this moving goalpost of when does it end? And my question is, well, does it end? And this is where it gets interesting. There are other cultural and print productions that resemble Gauchesca, but they're usually called hauntings, revivals, zombie narratives, and a whole variety of things that are not just Gauchesca. So what I do, my project is to say, actually, what if it is? And what would it look like for what somebody might call neo-Gauchesca or post-Gauchesca? I haven't figured that out yet, how I'm going to call it. But definitely it exists, is there, and I talk about it. So I start talking about it with Molina Campos because he starts illustrating calendars in the 1930s, and it's estimated that there are, at any point in the 30s in Argentina, there are 18 million calendar prints by Molina Campos circulating. So it's a really large number, not to deserve some kind of attention. Now, where is the largest collection today? It's actually in Texas. So, thanks to the center, there I went. It's in the Harry Ransom Center. It's not in the Benson Library, which is where they have all the Latin American materials. It's in the Harry Ransom Center. And it's under the Edward Tinker collection. It's a special collection. And Tinker was a collector of Texan memorabilia and cowboy memorabilia. So that's why he also collected the Molina Campos materials. So off I went. And this is what I found, right? I knew about the calendars, and because the image is not very clear, you can see it in the handout. I knew it from the calendars that the subject matter was the gaucho. I also knew that there had been some exhibitions of his artwork beforehand. He exhibited his works in the 1920s at La Sociedad Rural. And if you know anything, I'll be happy to talk more about La Sociedad Rural. The president of the country, Alvear, in 1926, attends this first exhibition. So, again, we deal with this idea of popular literature, high literature, or popular culture, high culture. What is the divide? In the 30s, he starts creating characters, and that is Fileforo Areco. He's dressed for the May celebrations of the anniversary of the revolution of 25 de Mayo. And he starts narrating these stories and reminiscing about his past at Molina Campos's own estancia. This is all fictional. I've been in touch with one of his grandsons who holds the estate, and he says, nah, he made it all up, don't worry, this guy never existed. The calendars were free giveaways by a company called Alpargatas. If you know the Tom's shoes that are so popular now, okay, that's an Alpargata. Okay, Tom's is a rip-off of Alpargata. I just want to set the record straight. And these shoes were worn by a lot of people, and they also made a robe, and the company made all sorts of things. And so these were free giveaways. That's why there were so many at any given point. Now, if you notice here, this is cut. And I couldn't take a better picture of it, but this is all cut. And here it's cut. It's not me doing a poor job with this PowerPoint. And it's because people, what they would do is that they would get the free giveaway, they would cut them out, and then they would frame them and hang them. So these were so popular that people started calling them La Pinacoteca de los Pobres, the poor man's art collection, because people would just put them on the walls in their house. So this is part of what William Acree calls everyday reading, right? It's the reading material that surrounds us, and that it also is part of a larger rhetoric or discourse or spirit. And so I read these calendars as part of this everyday reading. Let's see. This is what one full page looks like. And yeah, the image is not very good. It's not very clear, but you have it in there. This is an interior scene. In the mid-30s, from 35 onwards, right? He starts in 31. From 35 onwards, they start having text. I did not know. Nobody told me that these had text. The ones that you find online don't ever show you this because they're cut. So this is something that I found in the archive. And this text is all written in Gaucho. It's not real Gaucho. We don't know what they sounded like, but it's a good approximation. And these little blurbs, they tell you what the image is about, and it's usually either political or social or something about the culture of the Gauchos, or it's humorous. In this,
What is gaucho, the gaucho mean, that it contains indigenous
it
words?
mocks the way that somebody who is not literate would have sounded like supposedly.
I see, like written southern accent or something.
Something like that.
Like
Yeah, it's like a
Martin
Mark
Fierro
Twain
or
kind
not?
of. It's like Martin Fierro.
Is it?
Yeah,
Sí.
yeah. Martin Fierro, Juan well, the novels not so much, only in the dialogue, not in the narration. But Don Segundo Sombra has it. Ascasubi wrote his entire Cielitos in Gauchesque, and that's the Gauchesque, right? Is the voice of this Gaucho that is supposedly iletrado or unlearned. So it takes a special kind of person. That's what Lugones was saying. If you're an Italian immigrant at the turn of the century in Argentina, you're not going to figure out how to do this because you don't have Argentinidad. You don't have what it takes to decode this. And that's why Lugones was so keen on proposing the Gaucho as this, archetypal Argentinian. So I did not know that they had text. Go figure. Things you find. Other things that they do, and again, you can see it better. This one, and all of them have a little title or anchor sentence that relates to the image. It's always written in Gaucho, in the Alpargatas ones, and they're always somehow humorous or makes you think about something. This one says, this is a soldier who's telling a Gaucho who to vote for, and here we have emblems like the flag and the shield. The arms. And this one says, "Vota por el gobierno," right? And this is not standard Spanish. Gaucho, vote for the government. In this one we have a butcher. He's always representing his own estancia, or supposedly his own estancia. In this one we have an Italian immigrant who brought his own camera from Italy. Areco just got married to his wife. She's very shy, so she doesn't want to look at this guy because he looks creepy. This is all from the text, from the blurb that I cut out, okay? So he explains this to you, right? It's not me making it up. And what the Italian settler did is that he brought a canvas that looks like they're in the sea, even though the whole room is run down. And he can't speak Spanish very well, so he says, "Míralo pajarito," because he can't do huh. He can't say pajarito, he says pajarito. And this is all part of the humor that they create, right? And these are the classic Molina Campos with horses in like impossible positions. And then this one is just a blurb about trying to figure out how to mount that horse while it's doing that. There is 1 year that Molina Campos was not commissioned to illustrate for Alpargatas, and that year was 46. This one, the ones that Luis Medrano does, this one in particular this year, the setting is fully urban. There, out of the 12 images, only 2, and I only gave you one example here, is set in the countryside, and it's a very different countryside from this green idyllic with red earth and children and landscapes to something like Molina Campos, which is always dirt and gray and white skylines, but not a lot. Obviously, soccer plays a role, tango plays a role, and the Buenos Aires harbor plays a role, right? Yeah, and then I'm just, there's so much more I can tell you about all of this, but we don't have time. And then in the mid-40s, 44, right before the end of the war, Molina Campos travels to the United States with a few fellowships, and he did not like Perón. He was not a Peronist. He very much admired the U.S. So he starts traveling here. He has a number of exhibitions in New York, San Francisco. He starts working for the Disney studios. Eventually, he has a fallout with Walt Disney because Walt Disney didn't represent the Argentinian goofy gaucho the way he wanted to. But his style definitely changes, and what we see in these, which I could not find anywhere else but here, or rather in Texas, the story is not told. It's no longer a narrative by one gaucho, it's two. They start traveling the country and they show different aspects of the land, and all of the blurbs are in English in these two, in 44, 45. The story is still written by Molina Campos, but man, is this propaganda. It's all about showing how Argentinians actually have indoor plumbing and wear shoes. It's basically that. It's comparing the two countries and saying, look, our friends in the South, they're also fighting against the Germans, because this is right at before World War II ends. And the same thing happens in 45. Now the thing is that Argentina was neutral during the war until very, very late. Yeah. So Molina Campos is doing something very different here and says, no, we actually are against them.
Lying.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You could call it.
You could call it lying. Yeah. But one thing that happens in the Minneapolis Malign, which by the way, the Minneapolis Malign was farming machinery producers, so they made tractors basically. It's like the competition to John Deere.
John Deere is right there too in Moline.
Yeah, so the John Deere ones are green, and the Minneapolis Malign are yellow. So these here, the only two that appear are yellow, and that's why. It's the only time that you see technology, like technological advancements in farming in Molina Campos, is because he had to put them here for the Minneapolis Malign. Obviously, here there's a school teacher, and they're saying it's like, oh yeah, we stopped by this little country school, and the children were learning things because they're not savages. I'm giving you a summary, but that's what the blurb says. So they definitely have a different feel. They have a different politics. They're no longer concerned with showing gaucho culture as much as it is showing that Argentina is a country that the U.S. can see as a brother, which is good neighbor policy all throughout in these 2 years. Some of the differences in the images is in the top. This is from Alpargatas. All of the horses in the Alpargatas calendars are very, very thin. They're emaciated. This is part of what made them so funny to people, because they could recognize that Argentina wasn't well off and that these were not meant to be fattening the cow. In the Minneapolis Malign, what happens is that all of the horses, even though they're still very cartoonish with exaggerated features, they're not thin anymore. They're not emaciated. They're actually really well fed in the Minneapolis Malign, even though they're still roaming in Argentina. But in the Argentina calendars, the Alpargatas, especially in the 30s, they're all very thin and the ribs always show. And somebody said to me in Texas, well, there are some kinds of horses that you can see the ribs. And I went through the books and it's like, well, it seems like if you underfeed your horse, that's how you get the ribs to show. So part of this discourse in the Minneapolis Malign that, again, I did not know until I saw the archive, is Argentina is doing a lot better because is a friend of the U.S., including, you can even see it visually here in the horses that are a lot fatter. Toward the end, in the 50s, he illustrated the Minneapolis Malign until 58, and he died in 59. The Minneapolis Malign actually starts sending farming implements and machinery to Argentina. And what happens is that they, together with everything else, they also send the calendars. So the calendars become bilingual. There's no longer any kind of narrative. There are no main characters. It's just description of images. Some of them are different areas of the country. Here is northern Coya pack, with the former spelling of Coya. This is just a landscape with some flamingo, and this, the 57 ones are just wild animals.
Where do you have crocodiles in Argentina?
Yeah, what, we do. They're
We
not
do.
they're not crocodiles, they're,
Caimanes.
no, they're smaller, and they're called, I'm blanking on the name, but they have a different name. Yeah, but it's in the north, where the river is, like at Misiones, around there. So they start traveling, but there's no more the narrative that really pushed the other ones and really made the people actually try to collect them and to piece the stories together. So these have really changed throughout the 20 years that Marina Campos pretty much illustrated them. There are also some others. There's a Martín Fierro illustrated for Alpargatas, where Martín Fierro eventually dies and goes to a very Roman heaven with men in togas. But Martín Fierro dies, and so does his horse, because in heaven he appears on horseback, which is really bizarre. But it's the more classic. I guess one good point of comparison would be, just to give you an idea of the scale of these in Argentina, would be the Norman Rockwell calendars for Boy Scouts, and it was actually the same printer in Minnesota that printed the Norman Rockwell printed the Minneapolis Marion, and that's what I have. I try to keep it very short and sweet. I'm happy to take a lot of questions. But yeah, that's it. Thank you.
I wait till the end for the questions.
That was great. We can ask, we'll hold questions till the end, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
We appreciate technical assistance from anyone who can get it. Uh-oh. I think maybe it's time for us to get, it's time for us
What
to
do I
get a
have
new
to do here?
projector. ¿Qué pasó?
I don't know how to select project.
Should I begin without the?
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you for having me here, and today I will be speaking about transit migration in Mexico, and I'm going to define it briefly. It is the movement of people mostly coming from Central America, although they also come from all over the world, who cross Mexico on their way to the United States. I will be exploring the proliferation of experiences of confinement in the extended borderlands that Mexico has become due to the dynamics of transit migration. And I will be relating my findings to contemporary understandings of large-scale political phenomena like citizenship and sovereignty. I will show that the distinction between citizen and non-citizen is collapsing in the context of transit migration, and that the state's sovereign control of both territories and bodies, with a heavy use of confining techniques of punishment, is giving way to a more hybrid regime of sovereignty involving a variety of non-state actors. So this is just to give you an overview of what my talk is going to be about. I changed the title of my presentation because the gender part of my talk is not going to be as emphasized, but I'm happy to expand on this dimension once I finish.
Okay, why don't you pause for a moment so we can fix the computer issue and we can continue. That was a good introduction, but
Try to unplug it and replug it.
oh, sorry?
Try unplugging and then replugging.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, sometimes you have to turn the computer on first. Sometimes you have to, you wanna try rebooting?
I think that's what's
Wanna let
Should I
reboot
do
it?
Yeah, well, I closed it and I opened it.
Yeah, but
Do you wanna try this one instead?
Yeah, maybe we can try Manuela's computer
Yeah.
because it worked there. So maybe.
Because it worked
well, it
there
may not
before.
anymore. No, now that it's been disconnected or whatever. I think it's
Yeah,
time we
that's
buy a new
that's the old one. It's
projector.
do the.
So simple now, there's this big. Okay, now instead of project video, hit project computer. There you go. Thank you.
Okay. So, ultimately, in my dissertation, I argue that even as refugee crises growing in the Americas every year have led to massive displacement and confinement of populations within and beyond carceral facilities through migrant detention, incarceration, and deportation, the experience of transit migration across Mexico teaches us how people reinvent citizenship in transnational terms when confronted with extreme violence and precarity. So I want to emphasize these two dimensions. I'm going to be more critical in my presentation today, but my dissertation has these two aspects. So here is an overview of what I will be doing today. I will define transit migration and give you some context about this phenomenon, and I will briefly point out what the focus and approach of my dissertation are. I will also refer to what my fieldwork looked like in the summer of 2015 and 2016 with the support of the center. And I will talk about my preliminary findings based on this fieldwork that I did in the summer of 2015 and 2016. And I will put forward a draft argument based on these preliminary findings. So you're probably familiar with this image of the freight trains called, in popular culture, the Beast. These are the freight trains that migrants in transit through Mexico use as their main means of transportation, both because it's more affordable, they don't pay anything if they use the top of the freight trains, and also because these trains are farther away from the control of the state. That is changing, and that has definitely changed in the last few years that I've been going to Mexico. So I want to expand on this in the Q&A if there's questions on this respect. But what I want to focus on in this slide is to mention that while there are many movies and books that have documented the extreme precarity and violence that migrants experience in their crossing through Mexico, my dissertation focuses instead in the encounters of citizens and non-citizens and transient migrants who are undertaking these very perilous journeys through Mexico on their way to the United States. So it's the encounters that interest me and what that is producing, politically speaking. So I'm going to not mention this so we can move forward. And so these encounters between citizens and transient migrants have three main forms. One is the form of care, and it's care by ordinary people, and my emblematic case is the case of Las Patronas. We can appreciate here how there is a woman offering food to transient migrants on the trains. So they don't even speak, but they offer food to these people. In this emblematic case, we can see how ordinary people who by their own initiative care for undocumented migrants, they are also themselves very poor and very precarious, and oftentimes non-protected at all by the state. We can also see this other form of encounter throughout Mexico. We see these red points that are shelters. So another way in which these encounters happen is through hospitality. There's a network of more than 50 shelters throughout Mexico. And these shelters offer from food, lodging for very little time to much more time, depending on how the context has changed. And showers, legal advice, basic aid, HIV tests, etc. So the kinds of services that they offer vary a lot, but they are located throughout Mexico in the routes of migration. That's another way in which these encounters happen. And I would like to emphasize that many of the shelters that exist in Mexico depend on the infrastructure that has been built by liberation theology, religious organizations and individuals, and it's very much the legacy of the Cold War, so to speak. This is another way in which the encounters between citizens and non-citizens happen. You can see on the left side a woman. This is carrying the picture of her son. This is the caravan of the mothers of disappeared migrants. They come from Central America, but their activism happens in Mexico with the support of organizations based in Mexico. So this is another way in which this encounter happens. And on the right-hand side, you can see the Via Crucis del Migrante. It's the Stations of the Cross of the Migrant. And this is a protest that is, both of them are ritualized. This one happens in December, this one happens in Easter. And both of them involve the coalitions and the organization of people, not only from Mexico, but also from our places. So I'm looking at that from a transnational perspective. So with the support of the center, I have been able to access the second form of encounter that I mentioned for the most part, namely the network of migrant shelters. In the summers of 2015 and 2016, I visited a total of 4 shelters, 2 in Mexico City and 1 in Ixtepec. So here I have 2 arrows for Mexico City, then 1 in Ixtepec in the south of Mexico, and 1 in Saltillo, Coahuila in the north of Mexico. And these are the sites that I'm going to focus on in my research, which I am continuing throughout the year in 2016-2017. Because these are potentially high-risk locations, safety necessarily plays a major role in my selection of sites. But I want to say that these sites also offer conditions that vary between each other, so they allow me to observe different ways in which these encounters happen. My dissertation focuses on these 4 shelters, plus the 2 protests that I mentioned, and the experience of Las Patronas, which I also mentioned before. And I can expand on what each of these sites offer, but for the sake of saving some time, I'm going to move to describing what my fieldwork was like the last 2 summers. So I want to mention that one of the key things that I could do with the pre-dissertation fieldwork that I did in the summer of 2015 and 2016 was to notice this changing context in migration in transit through Mexico. So I already had some clues about how I was going to go about my work, but something that really stood out for me during these 2 summers was the proliferation of confinement in the context of transit migration. So I want to mention, well, let me give you a little bit of background in how this happens. While previous numbers and images of refugees have laid bare a crisis of global proportions not seen since World War II, the US and Mexican governments hound people fleeing the surge of violence in Central America. So we see the Syrian refugee crisis on the one hand, and on the other hand, we see the Central American refugee crisis. but we don't see it as something that the media refers that much as a refugee crisis. Instead, we see this explosion of the militarization of the border, both in the US and in Mexico, and this has led to the massive detention and deportation of people in both countries. In Mexico, the militarized response to migration has extended throughout the territory with the Southern Border Program. Launched in 2014, shortly after more than 100 unaccompanied minors appeared at the US border, which President Obama declared an urgent humanitarian issue. So, I was going to show you the shelters first at which I was at, but I forgot to show you these pictures. But these are the 4 shelters that I was at. Casa Tochan in Mexico City, Hermanos en el Camino en Ixtepec, Oaxaca, Adolescentes en el Camino in Mexico City, and Casa del Migrante in Saltillo, Coahuila. So, but going back to the changing context of migration in transit in Mexico, I want to mention how for most people it is unknown the fact that the United States has a 34,000 quota of people detained, either because they are waiting to be deported or because they are waiting to have a hearing in court. And the United States in the last 6 or so years has met the goal of deporting more than 100,000 people a year. But this is not all that there is about detention and deportation. So besides what happened in the United States, we see that in 2015, there were more people from Central America deported from Mexico than people were deported from the United States. So without counting people from Mexico, the deportations overall were higher from Mexico than from the United States. So all this changing context has given rise to an expanding literature on a field that builds on the cross-fertilizations between critical prison studies and migration studies. And there's a whole lot of books and research being done on the detention of migrants as part of what people have called the prison industrial complex, the expansion of the prison industrial complex. So, for example, we saw last semester how the U.S. Supreme Court, I believe, pronounced itself in regards to the privatization of prisons in the United States, but it will not affect migrant detention. It will only affect the imprisonment of nationals. So in this context, and I mention this literature because my research and my dissertation, even though I am broadly concerned with these encounters of citizens and non-citizens, this is the context in which my dissertation is going to be more specifically located. So I want to mention my preliminary findings, and I want to read a little bit here because I don't want to miss some of the points that I brought. One second. So these are my preliminary findings based on what I've done in the last 2 summers and also in the last month, because I've been in Mexico since September 15. And so in my preliminary findings, I want to emphasize the following: that throughout Mexico there has been a proliferation of confinement, but as you will notice, I will not refer to just the detention of migrants by the state. And that is what is going to be different from most of the literature that has been focusing on this expansion of detention, migrant detention, as part of this prison industrial complex. I will also notice how there have been a blurring of the distinction between the citizen and the non-citizen. And there are more distinctions that are blurring in my research and which help us understand how political phenomena change and how this research speaks to larger political phenomena I want to make that case, but I want to focus today on the blurring of the distinction between the citizen and the non-citizen. And I will also point out how there has been, or I see that what's happening in Mexico with this proliferation of confinement is the emerging creation of a hybrid regime of sovereignty that doesn't reduce itself to the state detaining people. So it goes beyond that. So the first example that I want to give you is the story of Rosario Natal, a trans woman who I met in 2015 when she was doing her 5th journey from Guatemala to the United States. At that point, she had been deported 4 times, 3 times from the US and once from Mexico. She had been in migrant detention and in prison and in jail in the United States several times for different lengths of time. She had also had an ankle monitor, lost her asylum case. Rosario's case exemplifies the experience of migratory movement accompanied by an overwhelming restriction to that very motion. So as we can see, transit migration can be read as experience of moving, but actually what I see in the field is that it's very much as an experience of being confined. Even though Rosario had been literally confined in several carceral facilities, her journey is, I'm sorry, I need some water. Her journey speaks to a broader experience of confinement, where techniques of surveillance and punishment are appropriated and deployed beyond the walls of the prison. In her second to last attempt to cross the Guatemala-Mexico border in February 2015, Rosario was detained in the southern Mexican city of Tapachula and deported to Guatemala. As soon as she arrived in Tecunuman, she started again the journey north. Then, like other migrants, Rosario had to go around what work in practice as enclosures of land surrounding checkpoints mounted by the police. So I want to make the case that around these places where the police check the crossing of migrants, they work as virtual enclosures, and something very different in terms of how bodies are regulated happens outside those enclosures. So out of such enclosures, migrants may circulate with more freedom from state coercion, but they are also more vulnerable to kidnappings, assaults, rapes, extortion, enslavement, organ trafficking, forced prostitution, disappearance, death, and in general to the abuses of anyone who they happen to encounter in their journey. So this is also to mention that it is not just organized crime who abuses the migrants who are unprotected by the state. It's just everyone can abuse them, and they are actually abused by ordinary people as well. Therefore, migrants are locked in by virtue of being locked out of the places of state protection, which they cannot claim for themselves as they flee detention and deportation. Later on, in an attempt to find migrant shelter in Tapachula, passers-by from whom Rosario tried to obtain directions attacked her. Beaten and injured, she decided to surrender to immigration. While showing me the scrapes and scars on her body, she recounted how, to her surprise, the officers at the detention center left her waiting because they were too busy with other matters. So it's also to show how detention doesn't always happen. It happens in certain circumstances, especially when, and in this case, detention could have earned Rosario some protection under conditions of being injured, but it didn't happen. So it's also to mention the arbitrariness of the application of these state policies. Again, she had to reinitiate the journey after being denied prompt aid and relying on the help of ordinary people who helped her to avoid an infection in her open injuries. She arrived after 14 days at the shelter Hermanos en el Camino, one of the sites that I was at in the summer of 2015. And this brings me to my second example of these multiple experiences of confinement. In Mexico, in this network of shelters, people also experience confinement. Even though the shelter is in principle a place of hospitality and care where migrants can spend the night, eat, take showers, wash their clothes, keep their belongings safe, etc. The shelter is itself also a space of confinement, and you can see in the pictures of that I've taken.
Yeah, that
I
doesn't
don't know
look
if you
very
see
savory.
the barbed wire, and there are many other things that happen in the shelters that make them so similar to the migratory stations where people are detained. So enclosed by high perimeter fences, as you can see here, barbed wire and locked gates, and protected by 24-hour guards, the rhythms of the shelter, with fixed eating times and mandatory curfews, do resemble those of a disciplinary institution. In fact, migrants often complained that they felt as though they were locked up in prison. These characteristics render the shelter close to the image of ordinary prisons, refugee camps, and detention centers. And while I don't want to expand too much on this because I know that the time is limited, I want to mention a couple more examples. In the third example, in my third example, I see that the conditions of confinement that transit migrants encounter in this migration circuit have also come to affect certain groups of citizens, exposing them to arbitrary policing. So, for example, in April 2016, media outlets informed that the National Institute of Migration and the police were racially profiling not only undocumented migrants, but also Mexican poor and indigenous nationals. I've also heard since that black Mexicans have been deported to Haiti because they are taken as migrants. So these are some cases. You can see here, there's a picture that shows that Mexican nationals have been detained. This is a video that is on Vimeo by the Migration Agency of the Mexican state. But you can also see here, there's in Haiti news.
Of course, that happens here, right, with Latinos who are detained.
Right. There are people who have been deported who are not okay with their papers. So this is happening right now. And my fourth example, okay.
You could give your fourth example.
Well, maybe I will expand on the fourth example if there is time in the Q&A. But the fourth example refers to the situation of Cubans because the U.S. has regularized its relations with Cuba. People are fleeing Cuba massively. So there's a huge wave of migration from Cuba. And what happens is that they in principle have automatic entry in the United States, but they are facing in fact the same conditions that people from Central America are facing in Mexico. So I just want to conclude with a draft argument based on all these findings. And I welcome your feedback. I would like to welcome your feedback because this is very much work in progress, and as I work on my field work and my writing, I would love to hear what your thoughts are on this topic. By the time of writing this presentation, several instances of confinement in motion, as I showed, had happened, and I just want to mention that based on this ethnographic fieldwork conducted at migrant shelters, which I hope to expand to these other sites, I employ the notion of transit as a heuristic that names an assemblage of governmental, disciplinary, and punitive practices, as well as an emerging pattern of political subjectivity interacting with the state in unexpected ways. From modalities of pastoral power that shelter human mobility, yet reproduce techniques of confinement and governmentality typically associated with the state, as I showed in the case of the shelters, to activist repertoires of hospitality, care, and solidarity that dispense with most cherished nationalist and community attachments, thought of as preconditions of citizenship and democratic practice. My dissertation sheds light on a liminal regime of sovereignty and the transit of the political. It is overwhelmingly impoverished Mexicans struggling to meet their own basic safety needs who engage in caring and claiming rights for transient migrants, especially through performances of social motherhood, and religious practice poignantly exposing power regimes that govern without protecting, affecting citizens and non-citizens alike. And my core claim is that such efforts are giving rise to transnational citizenship practices from below that change our understanding of citizenship and sovereignty and the way states work in the 21st century.
All right. Here it is. I'm Carlos Valderrama. I'm from sociology. Right now, I'm writing my dissertation. I'm not writing, I'm recording. I have some issues at the beginning because I collected a lot of information and then I realized I can, narrow down my topic. I will explain later. So I'm kind of recording it again and I will present what I did in the fieldwork. This is the topic, Size and Force of Black Politics in Colombia during the 70s, Imagine Black Community. And this is kind of my research question and the same argument. In Colombia, a scholar has said that the Black social movement, the Afro-Colombian movement started in the 90s with the constitutional reform. And this is basically the common ground all over the world, to say something. And my idea is to show something different. One of them is if you use the concept of social movement, you might overlook other forms of politics that may happen before the 91. Obviously, social movement is a fancy concept. Everyone wants to use it, to say social movement means democracy, different practice of democracy, different meaning. Like Melucci said, they are the message of the new era. So that's why many people use that concept, but at the same time, again, overlook other aspects or other way of struggle that happened before the 90s. And that's the thing that I want to do. The other thing is, African American scholars always ask themselves why they were not a social movement like the one that happened here in the civil rights movement, right? That's the always question that came up in the discussion. So let's see how I can understand the way Black politics took form in Colombia at that time and why took that form and no other. So my question is how the historical Afro-diasporic project played out by Blacks in a context of racial mestizaje, U.S. imperialism, and leftist radicalism, which is a second form of imperialism. So here is my argument. At the beginning of the trade slave, it started Afro-diasporic project that have these 6 components: land, liberty, autonomy, Afro-diasporic relation, identity, and a sense of collectivism. You can see all of these elements in the idea of Palenque, in the Haiti Revolution, and in some forms of Black nationalism. So I want to see how this Afro-diasporic project played out in the 70s. Why the 70s? The 70s was a transition period in Colombia. It made sense. It was the period where people made a rupture with the institution. The governor came up. The leftist organization came up strongly. This is the period where FARC came up as an organization and many students' organization in the university. Before this, we have the Cuban Revolution, the influence of Russia. So this is a context of radicalism in Colombia. Many of the black that, in this period were confirmed the black organization came from these leftist organization, but also from liberal conservative parties. So it's a complex thing there. Different ideologies, different political agendas that we have to consider in that time. So that's why I use, I'm focusing on this period in the 70s. And here is the thing, so there is a difference between, I'm using here Gramsci and Winam concepts of racial hegemony. Gramsci says the way the war of maneuver happened in a dictatorship, and then we have the war of position in a democracy society. So we now use that theory, and he proposes racial dictatorship and racial democracy. So we have racial dictatorship in the slave system, the colonialism. That's why Palenque, Haiti, some for black nationalism have this kind of clear-cut political agenda that looks for, territory, liberty, autonomy. They created some sort of Afro-diasporic relation, identity, this is of self-value. But then this is going to change in a racial democracy, especially in Colombia, where we have this racial ideology of mestizaje that says, everyone is equal, everyone is included. So this is the context. But at the same time, we have the socialism, the socialist ideology that came from Europe. We also have the heritage of the colonialism, especially race in this case. But at the same time, we have the United States intervening in Latin America. So all of these create a tension between all of these tensions. Black politics came up, and I want to see their trends. How all of these factors impacted their political agenda, and at the same time, if because of this, they have some conflicts between this organization. What I want to present now is this. Where were the size and forms of black politics at that time? It's funny because if I tell you that we have a ley de negritude law, nobody might recognize what is that. But then if I say we have a law 70 that guarantees rights for black people, people may know. So this is kind of the way I want to show you that the 70s have been overlooked and nobody pay attention to the idea of negritude. All the movements all the size and force of politics that I will show you embrace the idea of the negritude. Obviously, they were influenced by CCR, by the movement in the Caribbean and the United States. But nobody paid attention to that. Everybody talk about law 70s and the black social movement because that's their common ground to say black social movement in Colombia started in the 90s. And 80s, 90s. But here is the problem. So when we deny what happened in the 70s, we overlook the importance of music. And I have a salsa song. Baila was sold as slave. There is a salsa song who, said that thing, and that was a song that one of my interview remarked every time when we talk. That song. But also we have El Negro Bembón. I don't know how to say that. El Negro Bembón, which is a song from Ismael Rivera from Cuba. This Ismael Rivera. Puerto Rico. Yeah, I'm sorry. That's right. So Ismael Rivera is a black Puerto Rican. He that was a movie back in the day. He wrote this song, El Negro Bembón. How do you say that?
The big fixed
Not
black man.
pejoratively, it would be thick-lipped
Black
Negro.
man.
Okay. Basson, and some of the former activists that participated in this period emphasizing that song as a way of embracing their blackness. What they said is, we didn't see black people in the TV. We didn't know about singers, black singers. But then came up this guy, and we saw somebody black in the TV, well dressed, right, with this music. So that was for me, that's one side of understanding black politics. And at the same time, the Afro-diasporic relation. But at the same time, we have black tradition, and we have curulao, we have cumbia, we have chirimia, which is music that came from, or better say, it recognized from the black areas. At that time, it was not as public and popular as they are right now. So Manuel Zapata Oliveira and the Zapata Oliveira came up, with this folkloric group that performed this music, black folkloric dances. That was another side for me to say, we have here a way of understanding black politics. Leonor Gonzalez is a well-known singer in Colombia. So she, her husband, I forgot his name, came up with this song, La Mina. The whole production is named Canto de mi Tierra and de mi Raza, which is something very, very powerful in terms of how they appropriate their race and their places. And in the other, we have black intellectuality, intelligentsia. We have novelists, poets, folklorists who wrote, a lot of articles and novels. And I think that's another way to understand, to see, forms and sides of black politics. And then we have black tertulias. They started in the 40s. Manuel Zapata Oliveira was really a key actor here. Nathanael Diaz, Tufik Meluk, Rich Aluma. Manuel Zapata Oliveira, he's from the Atlantic. Nathanael Diaz is from Cauca. Tufik Meluk is not a Colombia. He's a Lebanese, but he's important because he got the resources to buy African present. This journal published by a messenger. So that was one of the other sides of black politics, black tertulia. And you can see in the piece of